Yes, sorry. Okay, I hope now it's more easy to understand. My name is Pedro Rosa. I'm president of the Faial Island Sustainable Tourism Association, and we are an association of companies and professionals working in the tourism area. And our organization has 3 years now, and since its first steps, actually here in this room, where we had our first meeting with our associates, we've been working a lot with history and heritage of our island and of our city, and not only to show to the people who are visiting us as tourists, but also for the people who live here, to know more about their roots, to know more about the place they live, and to cherish it and understand it in a different way. And therefore we have done in the last few years many activities to foster knowledge, to share ideas, and also to debate about the future of many of these things that need our care and our attention and our attention, yes. Well, we've been working in this last few years also a lot with Tiago Simões da Silva. He's a researcher working with history. He's from Faial, and he's currently working and doing his doctor, PhD, in Lisbon. And he's been amazing working with us because we are professionals from tourism. Some of us were born in this island, some of us came from mainland to Faial and adopted Faial as their home, and some others came from other countries and also adopted Faial as their home. So we are people who live here and who want to learn more about the island. So with Tiago we did some courses, workshops, guided tours, but all was in Portuguese. So we had other people who would like to also to know more and to be a part of these activities, but it was not possible because it was all in Portuguese. So we decided to take this opportunity, and also was a challenge by Rita Carneiro, who challenged us to make an activity that would bring the people who live here in Faial and who are not, maybe you speak some Portuguese, maybe some people don't speak Portuguese, but the important is that we all live here and we want to share this knowledge and these ideas, and also to know from your side how you perspective the island and how you feel it and how you want to be involved and engaged in the island's life. So today we have like a presentation. Yeah. So we have this presentation. It's we'll have a first part about the history of Faial from settlers until the present time. And this will be historical information, and then we'll also have a period when we will just like have a more informal talk, and also maybe you have some questions, some areas you'd like to speak more, and then or to know more, and then we will be more interactive event. So first I want to say I'm very happy to see this room full of people, and that we can have this activity with all of you here, and I hope you enjoy, and I will pass mic to Tiago. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tiago. I think Pedro already said everything. I'm going to be, I don't like to talk seated, but I just did a COVID vaccine and I'm still not feeling very well, so I will not be able to stand all the time. What he challenged me to do today, as he said, we did a lot of other activities before. The first thing we did together was a small, if you don't hear me, make a sign, sorry. And the first thing we did was a small debate about local history and heritage, and we start doing kind of diagnosis of things that were needed to be worked. I was already doing some other things before working with the association about history and heritage. So I'm doing research, as I said. And then seeing what there were things that were needed to be worked for tourists, for visitors, even for people here, what periods of history or our heritage that existed or that was not explained or didn't exist or was not shown, and people were asking about it, people wanted to know more. And from there we start doing bigger things and working in specific areas. Last year we did this big activity with courses about local history for professionals and then for open to the public, and then specific debates about things like archaeology, sacred art, and other things. And the idea today is something like that beginning, so I will do a history presentation here. First thing, we can interrupt as much as you want, so we can dialogue while I'm talking. I don't want to be talking alone all the time, so be free to make questions or to ask for something. If I don't know how to answer, I will search for it later, but I'll try to go there, and so be free to interrupt. And this is not, let's say, an end in itself, so this presentation, you see it will be chronologically. I will go until the end of the 18th century or early 19th century, essentially, so I'm not going to do all the history of Faial. And I'm going to talk specifically about two areas, let's say, so things that are not well known and that I'm doing research now, and I think that you wouldn't know about it. I will bring at least one thing here in edit that is the first time I'm going to show it here, and even other people in Fayal don't know it. It was never shown before. And then themes that are related to our relation to other countries, to commerce, to people, not only Fayal, people from Fayal going to other countries, having ships and routes to other countries, but also especially people from other countries living here, so communities of people from other countries that were living here, people that were passing here. One of the debates we had last year was about cosmopolitanism. Our Horta in Fayal is a place of people from several countries, and we had this debate about what it is nowadays, what it means, but how historic it is. So it's something recent, it's something that was born in the 19th century, or is something that started much before. And so I'm working about I didn't say that, so I'm doing research especially about 18th century, 17, 18, and mostly 18, early 19th century. And so we can now say that this started much before. The first thing I'm going to give some very small notes about the discovery of the islands. I think, well, if you are here, you are all at least 100 years before there was knowledge of islands in this area, but we didn't know exactly. Maybe they did know that it was these 9 islands or 7 islands. Maybe not. We don't know. There were mythical islands. But even knowing that some people have been here before, even admitting that people were here 2 or 3 or even more centuries before, the oldest society we have, it's Portuguese. From a Portuguese identity, and so there was the first that settled here and make a community here. And both the discovery and then the process of settling and starting building communities, it started, of course, from east. So in Santa Maria, São Miguel, Terceira, that's why it's the third island, and then so all the way to Flores and Corvo. And in, as I said, so we have this date is not 100% sure, but plus 1 more year or less 1 year will be around that 1427. and of the discovery, and 15, 20 years later the island started to be settled, starting of course in Santa Maria and São Miguel. Faial started around in the 1460s, and around 1466-67 there was this big group of people with the first captain of Faial that decided that this place here where we are would be in this bay, these two bays, Porto Pinho and Horta, would be settled of the main village, and they will start inhabiting the island around here. And this is the first data about foreigners here, and you all are probably, well, at least at a place called Flamengos, maybe some of you live there or around there, and Flamengos, the Flemish Valley, because among the first settlers there were Flemish. And there is historical information, and then there is a legend and mythical thing about the Flemish. There were Flemish in Faial, and especially in the islands of the Central Group, but also in other islands. And the difference here in Faial, in Pico, that was, in terms of jurisdiction, very connected to Faial. It was the first captain of Faial, called Josfa Nurtara. On the opposite of what happened with other captains in other islands, including some of the Flemish captains, he had success. So he arrived and he was able to build a community. He was the first captain, and some of the others failed in their attempts. They bring people, and then the first settlements didn't work out, and so there was another captain that was nominated to substitute them, or there was other problems with people. With him, we know that probably he came in a first travel that apparently didn't work very well. He returned to Flanders, and then he came back and did the second to work out. And meanwhile, there was people here. There was Portuguese people coming from the other islands. So same as I was telling. So people were coming from these islands, and Terceira, as a bigger island, started sending people to the other islands around, so people would spread from the other islands. And when he came here, it was, as I said, a Portuguese community. We have interesting references, like the first generations, or the first generation of Flemish that came here, and of course they were speaking Flemish, and they had this Flemish culture. Then they were marrying with Portuguese women, and their children, both sons or children of Portuguese and Flemish, or even sons of Flemish, they were not learning Flemish, they were learning the Portuguese language and the culture, because most of people were Portuguese. The political and the cultural structures and institutions and everything was Portuguese. But as we had this captain and the local elite, many of them in the early moments, so in the 15th century were Flemish, they left a mark, of course. And even there was more Flemish coming even as late as the end of the 16th century. There was Flemish coming here to make merchants and people that were coming to live here. And some of the families, like the Brum family that we have now, it's Flemish, but they came 100 years after the first settlers, or more than that. So they are not from these first settlers. And these explanations come from the Dona Isabel, the Duchess of Burgundy. This is Flanders, and she was sister of Infante Dom Henrique, the very known Henry the Navigator, was the son of the King of Portugal, so she was also daughter of the king. And he was the one son of the king who was given the responsibility to settle the islands and many of the African territories, and so he was responsible for this part. And he had one problem, that Portugal, so mainland, what is now mainland Portugal, was sending people to the north of Africa, then to Madeira and to Azores. They tried Canary, but the Canary Islands, but failed because the Spanish could have Canary Islands before. But they had these places, and especially the islands, where it was needed to have a big group of people, not just a small fort and a trade point, but actually to set a community there, because otherwise some Spanish or some other community could come and conquest the island, and Portugal didn't have people enough to send to all these places. So they were sending places from north and south of Portugal, but we need more people. And Dona Isabel, she was married with the Duke of Burgundy, who was the ruler of Flanders, of this area. They were in war, and they had people that wanted to go away and to go to other places. And one of them was this Jos van Urtere. He was the son of one of the local feudal lord in the place, and so as a second son, the only way he had to be able to have his own house and to get rich was to go to war, and so became has his own titles because he wouldn't inherit it, and so coming to an island and being the lord of an island as the captain of the island was an opportunity to do that, and himself became he was responsible to distribute the land around and to say who would be settling the small places around the island. I'm not going to analyze all of this. This is part of a text I did, and this tour is one of 2 or 3 maps like this, but trying to make it simple. If you look at the dates, these are the dates concerning references that we have in documents. And so especially for the early years and centuries, we don't have much information, so it's kind of, in what I did with this was literally a puzzle, trying to have pieces and trying to have a bigger picture when most of pieces are not there. But what we can understand is that, so we have Horta here, and the first thing that we can still see today, and if you look to all the other islands, the parishes today, most of them, with few exceptions, they came from the higher point or the center point of the island, and they go all the way to the sea. This structure, this is remain of the original lands called the Sesmaria that would be given to the settlers. So the captain would say, this piece is to you, this one is to you, this is to you, you distribute it, and these small pieces that were not very large, that were not very large, but they will all start in the sea and go all the way up to, they would say do mar serra, so from the sea to the highland, to the forest, when they could have a part in the shore with access to the sea, access to places where they do the wells for water, and a middle area that would be this area around. That was the area that could be cultivated and have animals, and so the land could produce. And the higher area where they could have extract wood and eventually other materials and hunt, etc. And we can understand that they started here, so they settled in that first travel in the around 1466 or 8 in this area, Porto Pinho, so where is now the church of Angustias, that recently were found remains there of the first, the primitive chapel of the 15th century. So they settled here. This is the place right between the 2 bays, so it's the safest place to land. And in the end of the 15th century, they start building the city that the center was in this area. So I will talk a little bit about that further. But in the beginning, so they settled this area. Then we have the Flamengos, in the Flamengos Valley that has this name of Flamengos, so we can imagine there was a Flemish community there. And then we know that the main both relatives and friends of Jos van Urtere were given lands in these areas here from Feteira and probably to Castelo Branco, and here Praia Lom Sharif, Pedro Miguel, and so they start settling, doing settlements around these areas to the south and east, and so the island was starting here and spreading to the sides. Then there is this place here, that I suppose many of you know very well also, Cedros, that has that goes out of this narrative, and we still can't explain exactly, but because they have a very primitive, very old settlement from the 15th century, starting in the 15th century, and all these areas around here are more recent. So probably what happened, like happened in other islands, was that there was 2 different settlements, so one in the south and one to the north. These were, when you come from the other islands, they would arrive first to this area. And probably there was this more Portuguese, with some Portuguese noble people living in Cedros. We have some information about that were kind of rivals maybe to the captain, so they would have some independency there. And the captain was here. But in the other islands, if you think like Pico, there was 2 settlements in Lajes and São Roque. That what the chronists say is that at some point they meet in the middle and they found out that there was people on the other side, so they didn't. And this happened in other places, and even in smaller islands. If you think about Flores, if you think about São Jorge, you have smaller small villages and the Conselho, the city administration. And here we just have Horta. One. And what probably happened was that although there was these 2 communities, Cedros never reached that point to become, let's say, independent village, because actually the settlements around, Cedros was growing, and so creating settlements around. But the captain never left them, said like the village is here, the administration is here, and so we rule over Cedros, as well as they ruled over Pico for many decades. And he was also captain of Pico, and even some independent, like the military organizations, hierarchies that were independent in each village. The ones from Pico had this special thing that I still don't have an explanation yet, because they were theoretically independent. By the law they have this status, but then they were dependent of Faial, of the captain, that theoretically was in the same rank as them, but then they had to respond. He was going there, and so there was the captain here had this influence around. And this is Sir Walter Raleigh, English privateer. And to give you just one small keynote about pirates and privateers that were going around the islands from the beginning, especially from late 15th, early 16th century, and all the way to the early 19th century. Sir Walter Raleigh and the Count of Cumberland did 2 attacks here in Horta in 1589 and 1597, and this queimaram. They burned, yes. They burned some of the churches here, the main churches. Obrigado. They burned some of the main churches, and they stole all they could. They destroyed part of the city. Our fortresses we just had the fort of Santa Cruz, the Castelo de Santa Cruz, in a version that was at the time very, very near that what we have today. This was the same, of course. The walls were rebuilt and were changed, but it had this same structure. But all the other forts didn't exist, or most of them. And this image is the monks that are doing, friars that are doing trade in north of Africa. This was called the cativos, so people that was kidnapped by privateers, especially from Argel and north of Africa. They would be taken there, and then there was this big national movement and effort of people that were doing donations. There was some taxes specifically. The money would go to this. There was this like an account was the cofre of cativos, where they would put money, and every a few years, sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes 10 or 20, depending when they could do it, they would go to Africa and pay this money to bring back people. I don't have time to talk about this now, it's also but we have some of the, even in the national history of Portugal, I'm not sure now, but I think it's about 1/3 of the people or more that were kidnapped were from the Azores, or kidnapped in the Azores or around the islands in boats. Some even in the islands, they would just stop the boat, come to the shore and take people away. And some of the most interesting stories that we have of people that were kidnapped and came back, and even people that became pirates. There was a guy from Domingos in the 17th century that became a very famous privateer, and then he was arrested, and we have his testimony because of that. And most of that, many of that passes also here. And why the English, that were our oldest allies and still are, were continuously our allies, were attacking us in this time? Because in 1578, the King of Portugal died in Alcácer Quibir in Africa, and 2 years later, we didn't have a direct heir. There was several candidates. One was this man Antonio Prior do Crato, and the one that was the winner of this situation was King Philip of Spain. And so from 1580 to 1640 in Portugal, and if you see the history of Portugal, it would say this at this date. If you see the history of Azores, it's 1583 to 1642. Because we fought back here, and actually Faial was the last place to resist to the Spanish. But what is important here is that for 60 years we had Spanish here in the Azores, especially in Angra was the main island. Sorry, I start. Get distracted. But we had these people, many military especially, and political leaders that were in Terceira. The routes that were coming, there was two international routes, world routes. The Portuguese route coming from India, and the Spanish route coming from especially Central America. And on these 60 years, these two routes met in Angra, and so Angra was the center of the world. Everything, the spices and the silk and the China porcelain and everything coming from China and especially from India was passing there, and everything, all the silver and other things coming from America was passing there. If you go to Angra, I don't know if you know Angra, you go to Angra, it's still World Heritage, and they will still say to you, we are the center of the world, so everything still passes here. They are very proud of that. But in this, especially in Angra, this is felt there was an influence of the Spanish culture and Spanish people staying there, but there was also people coming here, the ships were Portuguese and Spanish passing here, and Spanish like soldiers and families that came here, and then some stayed even after the end of this period. Then we had a Portuguese king again, and some of the people stayed here. And just a little note about economy of the island. So I'm as I said, just doing some small, talking about specific topics. This is just to do a context about the why we had this the Albor year of Horta and all the foreigners that I'm going to talk after. Because we had the local economy, and one thing that is important to know, we are now talk, especially here in Faial, we are the Cidade Mar, the city, the sea city, and we have the sea week and all this relation with the sea. And of course, if you go to the other islands, they also have relation with the sea and activities and fishing and now whale watching and diving and everything. But we have this. Just yesterday we were debating about that this brand and this image. We are the sea city, and we have this special relation. Historically, the islands, although we were in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of all these routes, the living of the people was done not for the sea, not for this idea we have to the sea, but they were living as people were living in the interior of Portugal, mainland Portugal, in Europe and other places. So the life was to work the land, to produce cereals, here most of it wheat and then later corn, and to produce wheat, to produce vegetables and things that we could eat. And the economy was essentially a sustainable and local economy, so to produce some things that we would consume locally, and also linen and things to dress. And then there was this trades and exportation of some things that people would trade to buy things like salt, olive oil, some other cloths, iron and glass for the houses, and other materials didn't exist in the island, and of course who was very rich could afford to have porcelain and exotic woods and cloths and silks and everything. Most of people, they could afford a little bit of salt and olive oil and not much more than that. But this parallel with this local economy, there was this, most of the land was owned by a few people, the noble people locally that owned all the land. And especially the cereals were, since the 15th century, were used as was used to pay the rents on the land, and so was most of the economy was made not in money but in trade. And then these people would join together these big quantities of cereals that would be exported. And then we had these different cycles of economy, and we will learn about the orange period, about the whale hunting, that is the more recent one, the last one here. But before that, first we had the pastel, the wood, and until starting in the 15th century and until the 17th century, that's why we have a place called Pasteleiro, right next to Porto Pinho. So the first lands there after the house of the captain were from him and the family, where they would produce this plant to export to Flanders, and not only, but especially to there. And then there was wine and aguardente. I didn't translate because I don't think there's a word for that specifically, but I think you all know what aguardente is. And so the wine and aguardente, especially from Pico, but that was exported here. Then orange, that started in the 17th century. Orange was exported to the ships as all the other vegetables and cereals and everything. But the orange and also lemons and some other fruits, but especially orange, was very important because of vitamin C, and so was something very important to have in the ships in the travels. And then, especially in the late 18th century, it became a very important exportation. And these two, wine and orange, they ended in the 19th century. There was diseases in the plants and the alterations also in the market. And then the whale hunting that started in the late 18th century was a big thing in the late 19th and to the 20th century. So these cycles, they were working or happening at the same time for most of the time, but then there was these moments where they were one or the other were more important. And these moments were also coincident with the moments where some of the islands, and in this case here in Faial, where it became a most important place. And in the turning point, I was before talking about Angra, and in the 16th to the early 17th century, Angra was the main place of the Azores. It was the harbor where everything happened there. In the mid-17th century, so there was the end of this union of crowns between Portugal and Spain, but Portugal still have this route to India and the Portuguese maritime empire. But what happened in this time was that this monopoly that Spain and Portugal had, half of the world was from Spain, half from Portugal, this ended. And the idea of the mare liberum, so the open sea, the free sea for everybody, started. The other countries, as England, France, Netherlands, they start having more technology, and sometimes better than our technology, so they were able to navigate as well. And before we had the pirates coming to the Azores, and from the south of the Azores it was safe because it was only Portuguese and Spanish, so no one else would go there. In this area, everybody started going everywhere. So Portugal lost the monopoly on the India and Orient, and physically lost some of the places they had. They were conquered by the Netherlands, by the French, and they start building and settling in the Portuguese America, South America, which became then Brazil. And so the main route in the mid and especially second half of the 17th century, the main route was starting to be Brazil. And at the same time, that was the Portuguese was doing this important route in Brazil. The English were settling in the Central and North America and starting to do the American colonies that were passing here also. And the third element is that Pico is the second biggest island, but in terms of population and development was always one of the smallest islands, exactly because of the land. Can't produce cereal, can't feed many people, so they can't have many people. And they found this solution: what we can produce, we produce wine. They were also everybody drink wine was the base of the limitation at the time. They were exporting wine to other islands, and in this moment of that I talk about Brazil and England and America, in Brazil there was a big consumption of aguardente, and the English and then the English in America, they were drinking a lot of wine and they liked this wine, so they were importing Madeira wine and Pico wine. That was actually called Faial wine at the time, was exported from here, and so this made that the production started going bigger. The exportation was done through Faial, so instead of stopping in Horta, they would come to Faial. They would do everything they needed here and take wine as well. And so the Faial, Angra decayed completely, and Faial started to grow as the main port. And as early as in the mid 17th century, especially second half of the 17th century, Faial was the main center of the transatlantic circulation. This is some images from. Some images from late 18th century of it's something to be I'm studying, working a little bit about it, but it's a long story that needs to be done about the exportation of wine. We know we have the production and the vineyards and all the process in Pico, but then there was a process of exportation here, and then there was a consumption outside. And these are some English 18th century bottles and glasses, and this is very interesting. This is a wine box that is from late 18th century, and this is an English model that is very common in England and in the United States, but is done in cedar wood from Azores wood, so probably then eventually here in Faial or Pico. And this is a proof of the influence that the English had here at the time. So we were imitating the models of furniture, the way they drink the wine, the way many other things. And these two maps, especially this first one, is just to see these are the routes. The second half of the 17th century I was talking about. Sorry. So this is the routes from Europe to America and Africa and India, but especially this one. This is the route that is coming from east. Then you see from Africa, from Brazil, from Central and North America. Everybody was passing here in the Azores, and almost everybody passed here, and most of these were stopping here in Faial in this time and through the 18th century. And so what we know about the harbor, when we talk about Dabney, about the coal, and then submarine cables, etc. So that started in 19th and then 20th century. This started much earlier. Many of these things that came to Faial even after Faial lost the place as the main harbor in the 19th or even 20th century, they came here because we had this long tradition. We were used to connect with people. We had some some institutional structures here that make everything more facilitate everything that didn't exist in other islands. This is just two or three testimonies from mid and late 17th century. William Bolton, it was an English merchant. He lived he lived in Madeira, and he had this business to the wine on Madeira and then to the Azores, to America, so across the Atlantic. And he passed here in May 1699, and he said that there were 20 ships at the same time here that were loading wine and aguardente here in our bay. John Winthrop was one of the founders of Massachusetts, and later he was the first governor of Massachusetts. He passed here, I don't have the date, but it is 1640 something, and he said this testimony, Faial is an extraordinarily good market. We don't know exactly what he means with this, but it's not only the wine market. They were exporting wine, so we would come here and buy wine to take, but we have this other one, Thomas Amory, in early 18th century, that he said he came here, and in Faial he bought a silk dress, a petticoat and a waistcoat to offer to his madame, his friend, and so we know that people were passing here, and it was not only these local products, these were some luxurious products from all over the place that were here in Horta, and so it was an international place, not only to be doing the repairs of the ships and to the basic needs they had to the ship and the wine, but there was many other goods passing here, because like happened in Angra before, we have many information to Angra in the 16th century and almost nothing to Faial in the 17th and early 18th century, but we know this happened here. And this is a little different, but this Gédéon de Labat, he was a French. He came to live in Faial around a little bit before this 1678, and then he married here, and there are still people, descendants of him today. Was one of the French merchants that settled here. And in May 1678, and we have all these documents documents that are in this case in France, and the others archives in the United States. I think all in the United States. And so most of we don't have information here, but we have like lots of this in other places waiting to be seen. And he hired a French carpenter and a French miller that came from France here to build a windmill. We don't know if it was built or not, we don't know what happened, we just have this reference. But one of the theories is that one of the models of the traditional windmills we have here in Faial is based in the French windmills because of him. Of this, eventually this situation, because the French that lived here as the English, so they were importing his ways of life, let's say, and the technology, the models, in this case the windmills, and some many other things. This is just an example also with Gédéon de Labat. This is between 1680 and 81. This is the representatives that he had in several places, and we can see he had in Faial, Pico, Terceira, Ponta Delgada, so São Miguel, Lisbon, and La Rochelle, where he was original from, and it was his brothers, two brothers, and a cousin that was representing him there. And this is important because in cases like this, we don't have the documentation about how this worked, but if he has these representatives, means that his business were doing this route from La Rochelle, from France to Lisbon to Azores, and so he was exporting wine, he was importing other products and getting rich in this, so he was part of the local elite. And now going to the 18th century, and so this process as Horta as the center, so went all through the 18th century. This map, I know it's very bad quality, but this is one of a set of 4 maps, very rare. I'm trying to get an image, a good image, but I still didn't find it. This is the one from America. There are the 4 continents, and you can see it, but around here there is this route of the voyages of Captain Cook and some other. You want to say something? Ah, sorry. Como?
Consegues aumentar um bocadinho?
Ah, sim. Eu da esquerda ou da direita?
Da direita.
Yes. Okay. And on these 4 maps we can see the routes that he did in the travel, and in here, so it's the Azores. Here it's I draw a little bit of the route, but the interesting is this detail here. In here we can see. So you have one of the routes here from 1779. And this is the islands. Of course, they are not exactly like this. These are correct positions, but not without the proportions. But we can. This is the only map that has a route drawn, at least from the ones I found. And this tells the route that we see. It goes all the way direct to Faial. And in this case, we have the descriptions that they do the ship's registers. And also a drawing that I found in London recently, done by one of the people that came with him in the boat. They did a drawing of the bay here of Horta in 1775, if I'm not mistaken. And This is another, I was talking about the foreigners, but then also people here, the owners, the guys that were, as I said in the beginning, the owners of the land, so the descendants of the first settlers who owned these big pieces of land. They were still getting rich, producing and having the lands and renting the lands and exploring it, but also they start doing business with ships and business to these other places, exporting the wine. So there was English and French and other people here trading wine, but also local people. This is just some of the examples, and it's a list of the owners of ships and the names of some of the ships that of late 18th century. And just one interesting detail, I don't know if you know what is Palacete do Pilar. Does that sound something to you or nothing? No? Okay, so we will need to do a visit there or something about it. But Pilar, it's not completely in ruins, it's just a facade in the gardens. But if you are here in the bay, in Avenida, if you look up to Spalamaca, there is a chapel there of Pilar. And if you look to the left, you see a house there. There's now a big yellow house in the top, and this a little bit down, there's like a ruins of the house. This was the house of this guy, Manuel Inácio de Souza. This was his brother, and this was his father and mother. And so you see all the family here. And then he married the daughter, I think, of this one. So he married one of his nephews. So he inherited everything from the family. And his father was already very rich and important merchant of the mid 18th century. And Manuel Inácio de Souza built that house. He was also a writer, a poet, and very, very erudite. But he had at some point 6 or even 7 ships at the same point. At the same time, he was the biggest owner of ships in the Azores at this time. And most of people would have one, or as you see, some of them here. Yes, like this. In these cases here, you have people, 2 people or even more that were associates. So they would have one ship for several people. He himself had 6 at the same time. And most of the time he had 4 or 5 that were doing precisely this route to Brazil, and of course going to Lisbon and to other places. And this is also a very simplified list of the consulates in Horta. These dates are the first date that I found out of a document referring a consul or a representative of this country. And so you can see many countries here. The most important would be these first ones, these 4 ones that start, especially the English one and then the French in the mid 17th century, and all the way through the 20th century we had always an English representative here, a French representative here, and for many of the other countries. When there was war in Europe, in the situations between countries, when there was countries that disappeared at some point or appeared, like these 3 here are countries that were created just a few years before they have a consul here, like United States. The first still now is in Ponta Delgada, but it's the Azorian consulate that was here until 1917, and it's still the oldest diplomatic representation of the United States is the consulate that was created here in Horta, which is comprehensive because we are the first place after we are actually, we don't have border with them because we have the sea in the middle, but they are the country next. So, we were the door to Portugal and then to Europe. And so when we see that especially English and the French were here all the time, we don't know who they were all the time, don't have information, but we know they were. And when, as I said, there was a war or some situation, there was always some repercussion happening here. So the consul was arrested if we were in war with them. There are situations when there are like Spanish that are accused of being spies here of our fortresses when we were in war with Spain. When England, our ally, was with war with France, the French consul here was called and the French were expelled at some point, and so we have situations like this. I found at least one, I think it's a French, during the Napoleonic Wars, that he asked to have the Portuguese citizenship he didn't call citizenship at the time, but what we would call nowadays, because he had family here, he had married with a Portuguese, with a woman from Faial, he had children, and he was expelled from the island, and so he was requested to become Portuguese, to stay here, and he said, I'm more Portuguese than French. But then the war ended and everything was okay, and I don't know if he had this permission or if he was only arrested or expelled, then we don't have all the documentation, but we have these cases. And about the communities, I said there was these foreigners living here. I did exhaustive as much as possible on the parish register, and between around 1650 and 1800, so 150 years, I found references to 18 people or families or couples and families from maybe 10 or 12 different countries. Around 60% were British, so English, or some Irish, or some we don't know exactly, but they were somewhere British. In some places the registers are confusing or misleading, but so British, and around 25% French, and then some Spanish, and then people from other places. But then there are a lot of in these situations. There were people that settled and lived here, and then they raised families, like the Jardin de l'Abad that I talked about. There are people who live here for a few years, maybe married or have children, and we don't know if then they disappear. We don't know if they went to other place, or we don't know what happened. We have some foreigners, we know they lived here, make business, and then they went away. And we have people that just died here. They were coming in the ship, and they went out the ship, and they fell and they drowned, or they were shot, or one was in a fight or something like that with another guy. And so these kind of situations. But then we know there were many others, doing the other part, trying to find the others that lived here. And when I end that, I will have a bigger picture. But then I know there were many others that we just don't know about them. But what we can understand, and it's more or less consistent, most of people would be English and many French also. And so we had one of the activities we did last year here was here in this place. Our cycle of activities was about archaeology. And we had a specialist of nautical archaeology that worked here in Port Pin, and then in the cruise port harbor, and also in Angra and many other places. And he told us Angra is completely Spanish in the way that the ships there were the shipwrecks in Angra that are from 16th to 17th century are Spanish, and the shipwrecks here in Horta that are from the late 17th and 18th century, they are all English. So he said Angra was completely Spanish and Horta is completely English. And one thing about, like, when we talk about the Dabney and the American influence, before the Americans were American, they were English. And so sometimes we forget that. We talk about the United States, but when we are talking like late 18th century, there were English there, then they become independent, was the United States. But especially in the first decades, all the culture and everything was English. So, and these communications we had with England and with the United States, but until a certain point it was more or less the same. And this to hand, I have some more things after, but I think now we will talk. I already talk too much, but I'll show you two images that I think are interesting. This is in England of Bakewell, I think. Yes, Bakewell in England. All Saints Church. And it says, I think you can read it, to the memory of Jonathan Brant Jr., late surgeon on board of Studybagger, privateer of Liverpool, which was wrecked in the Atlantic Ocean off the island of Faial, where he died in September 1779, age 19 years. I didn't find the register of his death or anything else, even the Studybagger. There are several ships, including privateers, with the name, so I need to check it better and see if it's possible to find something. I don't know, but it's an interesting example of what I was saying. We have Faial in some place in the interior of England, We have the connection with English. And one of the things that I like about this image and other things like this and other I'm going to show you is that when we talk about being like Horta, being in Faial, being international and being cosmopolitan and having all this tradition we have, and I hope to have passed this image that this started much before than the 19th century or the 20th century. We always talk about this, what we have here today. So we have people from several countries living here. We are now doing something that is speaking in English so that everybody could understand. And we have people living here. We are doing things for you in this case. So and there is this like we usually talk about Peter and Marina. So there is this cosmopolitanism and this way of we only receive people, but we are used to talk other languages, to contact with other people, and so there is this cosmopolitan environment. But something that I think is as much or maybe more important than that is not what we can see from the world here. So we have influences and people from the world here, but is when we go out in the world and that we see, like we don't have many of these things, 17th, 18th century, 16th century, we don't have anything. It's very difficult to tell this story because we don't have the buildings, we don't have almost no documentation, we don't have pictures, we don't have, so it's a few things, but then we go out in the world and Horta is spread all around. I found in as far as in Sweden an image. I didn't brought it today, but I'm working on that image also from made by a traveler in the 18th century. We find things like this in the interior of England, all in the United States, in Brazil, in all the other places. So we see Faial, people, everybody was coming here. And one last episode, I was telling about also this. Other side. This image, it's the first time I'm showing you this, and this one also. I actually did a conference 2 days ago here about the arbor, and I talk a lot about this and read a little bit of this description, and then forgot to bring the image in the end. I said I forgot the image, so you are seeing it in first and this is online, so it's nothing. I find it online, but it's not known here. And I'm preparing a conference specifically about this. One of these guys is Captain John Nicholson, Inglefield, and in 1782, this was he was coming in a convoy of British ships, and they got in a very big storm, and this ship was a Centaur, and it shipwrecked. More than 400 people died, and there was a group of 10 or 12 or something that were able to be in one of these small boats, and so they survived. And for 16 days they were out in the sea without any way of knowing where they were, without any technology, just out there. One of them died one day before they arrived here, and they arrived here, all of them very, very bad, as you can imagine, without water, without food for 16 days. And he arrived here and wrote a letter describing the whole thing. And only the only idea that I would like to leave here is that when he says that they were in the boat, in this very small boat, almost dying, one of them actually died there, and they wanted to go to land, just find land somewhere, but what they had in their minds was Faial. They said, we wanted to arrive to Faial because they know if the sea bring them here to the Azores and to the islands, they would survive. If they went a little bit up or down and past the islands, they would die, certainly. And at a certain moment, in a certain day, they saw land, but it was very cloudy. The point of reference was Pico, so they would always, everybody, and this is one of the few testimonies that we have, that someone saying how it was. So they would come, they would see two islands in Pico. Usually Pico would be seen before, and they knew they were in the right route. And when they saw land, there was no Pico because it was cloudy. They just saw Pico after they were here, and so they just saw an island. But he said, we knew it was Faial, we were praying it was Faial, even if it was an island, they would just want to arrive. But in their minds, Faial was the place to arrive, the place to be. And as much as they were approaching, we said we were also everybody knew that the place, like the people who come in AI today, they know the place to be and to arrive is Faial. But this had no compass, no GPS, nothing. It was just free there. And he says, and it's very interesting. He says we were, and as we approached land, they took I don't know 8 hours or something to arrive land. And he said we were almost dying, but seeing land, and we were praying and saying, "It is Faial, it is Faial. We are going to arrive to Faial." They arrived probably somewhere to the shore of Castelo Branco or Fayette to the south. And then for about 2 hours or something, they said we knew if we landed there, we would die because the boat would be in the rocks, we would die there. But we were desperate for water, and then they found a fisherman with a small boat that took them and bring them to Horta, and then they wait all night long for the health inspector to authorize them to land. So complaints about that. But they brought them food, and we said bread, wine, first the bread, then the wine, and then the water. For this order, and he said that the Portuguese, Pedro, if you want to come now on one end, but he said, he complained saying that the Portuguese are very formal, and they follow the rules very strictly about health rules and everything, and he complains a lot about that. I don't know if you agree, but it's a very interesting. So I'm gonna sit, and now we want to hear from you.
We can hear.
Não, isto liga aqui, espera lá. Não precisa, isto tem aqui. Desligaste? Ok.
I don't know anything about history.
Quer dizer alguma coisa ou ouvir as pessoas para não eu?
Well, this is actually kind of when we did the course with Tiago, and we had the first 5 days. This was a short, and this was maybe the first 3 days. So it means that there's still a big part also related with the 19th century and the 20th century, and with, I mean, there was not even the Americans almost.
I talk about the things that we never talk about, so...
Exactly. Well, it's there is something I think it's also interesting to say, and that I learned with Tiago, is that we know more, or we give more relevance in history to the things that are more studied, and that there is more information available. So some of these periods are normally less studied and less referred in the history, and the perception of the people from Faial. It's the memories and the identity. Sometimes it's a bit more foggy in these first times, and it's a bit more clear, more sharp on the 19th century and on the 20th century, where there is more information, there is more data, there is still buildings, there is more like letters, registers, and also some of the artifacts are still among us. Some of these things, they need to be more researched, and Tiago is doing a great job, and other researchers, but not many. But they are doing some work also to study more this earlier, or these 3 centuries of 3-4 centuries of Faial history, Azorian history. But of course, in 19th century and 20th century, there are also very relevant things also related with other countries and other periods. Tiago here approaches more also the period with sail, where they were sailing. So there was not even our port out there, the one we see every day on the right side. So this didn't even exist. So this is like another age when we have also already navigation with coal and not with sailing ships, and it's a different period also. Flying, so 100 years ago, also the first route crossing from United States to Europe also passed here, and other events like the submarine cables that had like a big impact also in more contemporary history and culture. Some of the things maybe we can approach in the field, in the city tours tomorrow and on Saturday. But yes, this period Tiago wanted to focus more and also to be open to your comments and to your questions. So we open the mic to everybody. It's a question. He's saying whoever.
How did the name Faial get given? Why is it called Faial?
It's because of the tree fire. Fire is I know, but I don't remember now in English.
Candleberry.
Candleberry.
Tree.
Okay. I know it for another name. Okay.
Beech.
Yes. The beech tree. Is that?
Yeah.
Yes. In this, no, I didn't show it. This is the first map I had in the beginning with the title. There is a printed version, and they have this Latin inscription. They say it's like 2 lines about Faial, and they said Faial because of they say Fagus. I don't remember now, but it's Fagus in Latin or something. So they say Faial. It's called like this because of the tree Faial, and then they say it's settled by Flemish. It's only 2 information, but this is done in Flanders. So. But it's because of that, because the Horta, in case if you ask, we don't know for sure, but most likely because of Urtara. It was the town of Mr. Urtara Horta. But there are different theories. There are 3 different theories. I believe this is the one that make more. It's not completely consensual because there are 2 others, but I believe it probably because of this. It's founded by Mr. Urtara.
Yes, one thing that is interesting also to see in present times is we don't know the islands. We normally associate and we project this idea, and we also foster this idea as Azores as like virgin nature islands, and this idea of nature as something we found and we preserve, but the nature we have nowadays is actually very transformed and very changed by man and by history. So we have many species that are now dominant, and also the green landscape and the cows and all of these are of course very recent transformations that are human-made. So we don't know today Faial as being a great place for fires, and also our symbol in Azores and specifically in Faial, the hydrangeas, they are Japanese. They are not from Azores. They are not native species, and Cryptomeria the same, which is not a native species, and so it's interesting. One of the conferences we had last year was about the six centuries of transformation of the landscape. So what we now know and what we now cell, not as a lie, but as a construct, is that we live in a natural area. But this natural area was very transformed by man. And a lot of the species, like incense that we have nowadays, they were brought here for a reason. They became dominant over others, and actually native fauna is actually very under stress or disappeared from many areas. So native, what the first settlers would have found when they arrived here is not at all what we have nowadays.
Sticking with the name, can you tell me why it changed the spelling? Because in all the old things, it's F-A-Y.
It doesn't have a reason. Sorry, it doesn't have a reason. It's just they wrote in different ways. Usually, it was with it's white. In the English, still use it. We see in the I told about the wine. It was Faial wine, and they kept spelling like that. But all the words, it is a linguistic thing. So it doesn't mean anything. It's just the way people write at the time, then change. It sometimes would be with a J, and in some that is mistaken. But in some English or American or English documents, we see Faial, both with an I or with an how do you say? Why with an Y? I. And so we say we see Faial, Faial Island, and sometimes we see the city or the village of Faial, so it's mistaken. But in the Portuguese documentation, it's just a matter of the names, like the spelling of the name change across time. That doesn't have a meaning.
So presumably that makes your research harder if the name.
Yes. Like when I'm doing, like in foreign
in other countries,
in a database, I actually have a list like of different spellings of Faial. So the ones that were correct, even if different, like with an Y or an I, and then I have like Faial with Y or an I, and then with one L or with two L, and all the combinations possible. It's like 10 different versions or something, and I have to try all of them. And once in a while, I found a different one. So but all the working on manuscripts and even in printed works at the time, I worked a lot with the parish registers, and sometimes in the same with the names of people, and even when the names didn't change, because people changed their name across time, and sometimes like the first name was important, like Maria, everybody's was Maria, as today, but that was official name. There was no documents, no like ID card or something. So this was the name person, Maria. You were baptized, was the baptized name. All the older names you could use as you wanted. So sometimes I was like Maria das Angústias, and 5 years later she would be Maria da Conceição, and 3 years later she would be Maria da Matriz, and but I have people who had like 3 different names, and then the last names would change as they wish, and that's very complicated. But about the spelling, sometimes in the same image in the register, like half of this page with 6 lines, and the priest writes the same name 3 different ways, with 3 different spellings. So it's not because there's no meaning at all. It's just.
I'm just curious about the, you see these images of women, the dress where they wear the hood. What was the origin of that? And I heard that, I read that different islands and different communities had different styles. Do you know anything about that?
It's a very big conference about it, and there's a lot of theories. I'm actually working about that, trying to write something about that. But very simply, we had the capote, that we will see one in the museum. You've seen in the folklore groups, ethnographical groups, they have this very big hood. And if you see like in São Miguel or other islands, they have the same kind of this cape and hood, but smaller ones, so it's like over the head. Our, as the traditional ones, they had a bone structure to hold it up. And there is this thing about this is the capote from Faial, because it's unique, it's different from the other islands. And of course there is all this thing about the capote from Faial and the influences from this and there we don't know. What I can tell you is that the use of capes and hoods and things, it came all the way from the Middle Ages and before, so everybody used these kind of things. Then there is these different models that evolved. With traditional clothes and everything else, there are many things that exist in a place. Like we say, this is tradition from here because it's only places here, but 100 years ago existed in the Nine Islands. And so maybe the capote was like this, maybe this was an evolution of Fayal, maybe not, we don't know. The only parallel I can find, and that makes sense, and that can be related to these things about Fayal having people from outside and influences, because the way people dressed was influenced by the English, etc. So we have like a very famous picture in National Geographic in 1936, I think, that is a picture of the girls here, also teenagers here or young women here, with low skirts or showing a little bit here. And in Portugal at the time this was an English and American influence here. But I have a register from 1794 of a woman, is a very rare document, a woman that passed here make a testimony, and she said the women from Faial and the Portuguese, I think she said the Portuguese, they are very unhappy. Their husbands rule, so they do what their husbands do. They don't have any freedom, and which was a husband thing, but not only about the husband or the man. Was all society. The woman from the society, high society, they had to be hidden. This capote makes that you go outside and nobody knows who you are. And even when they were inside the houses, they had these things. The houses, we don't have not even one example today in the city, but until early 20th century there was still a lot. This I don't know how to explain, but kind of a closed window. So there was the window, and then outside the window there was a wood box structure. Like they still exist south of Spain and north of Africa, that the women could be inside, they would see outside, but they were not seen from the outside. So it's a whole thing about covering the head and covering the women. And the only parallel I found with the capote, if you know, I think you all would have the image of Marie Antoinette, that thing. So these hairdresses were used in the 18th and as far as late 18th or early 19th century in France, in England, and women in the society in France and in England, in these places, so when they would go outside, they had a big hood that was not only a cloth, but it had a structure, because if it touched the air, it would ruin everything. So they had this big structure, and I believe, but this is a personal work in progress, eventual conclusion, I believe this is an influence from that. So people, because they would use this for sure here in the late 18th century, and as happened with instruments, with the valves and musics and many other things, these things that were from the high society, with the passing of time, there was a different way of doing things. So the rich women, they stopped using this, and so this was used they gave this to the servants, to other people, and this was still used when we arrived to the end of the 19th century. It was spread around, everybody used, and nobody remembered why was that. This happened with many other things, and I believe it would come from there. And maybe in Fayal they would use more this thing, and in the other islands no, because here we would use the dresses, like the silk dress that I was talking about in the 17th century. They was dressed as the English, they would dress in France, and in the other islands most of them wouldn't. And one of the things she says is the Portuguese women here, they try to imitate the English ones, because there were many English men, but most of English men would marry local women, so there was not many English women. There was not many English women passing by, but still the few that were, they had contacts with them and they wanted to dress like them, to be like them. They were importing clothes and later dresses. And so, just to finish this, if you like these things, I have this oral information as far as, or as close to as early 20th century. One of these last very rich noble families that started in the 16th or 17th century, and was one of the last to arrive, very rich in the early 20th century, and until 1910, 20 more or less, the teenage daughters of this family, their dresses was tailor-made and sent directly from the best storage in Paris. They were coming there and they were living here and dressing the best things coming from. So if you go to the 18th century, the noble families would have silks and not dresses, but tissues, cloths coming from Orient, from France. They would have these drawings that were circulating. How do they dress in Versailles? That was the source of everything. And maybe they was dressing like that 10 or 20 years later, but they would imitate that. And I believe that the capote is a remain of that. But it's my theory. So I'm collecting engravings from the time ladies would dress with the airdresses and stuff like that, trying to have a picture.
You said that the port is not, is it that the port is not as it is now, or it was somewhere else? When you said earlier that it was not going to be.
I think Pedro was talking about the arbor, the physical arbor. So the conference I did here 2 days ago was about that, saying our arbor that you see in close to Monte Queimado. So that is from the late 19th century, and so before that there was no harbor. There was from the 1840s. You know the Castelo de Santa Cruz, and close on the side of Clube Naval. That side there you see an old stone masonry landing place there. That's the first physical harbor where boats could stop there, of course, very small boats. It's from the 1840s, and before that the boats would stop outside, and then there was this small, like the one in the picture, small boats coming and carrying everything in and out. But all the area where is the harbor now, Santa Cruz there, where is the fishing area, all that area would be the old harbor area there in Porto Pinho when it was needed to.
I think nowadays we can still see, and if today we go out, we'll look into the sea and to the water, and we see how rough it is outside the port, the harbor area, and how still it is inside, and the reason why many of these things that Tiago said happen, and in these specific things are things related with geography. So even before you have the harbor, you have Monte Queimado and Monte Leguia, and you have two bays that are very protected, and we have winds that are mostly coming from south and southeast, and this bay is a very good protection. And the reason why also, beside politics and all of this, logistically, you could produce the wine in Pico, but you could not ship it from there. Even to set anchor of a big ship there is not a feasible thing. So the Pico wine would be brought in smaller ships here, then would be trabalhado, worked, stored and mixed, and also mixed with wine from other areas, and then it would be sold as a Faial wine first, Faial and Pico wine later, and Pico wine later. But we can see like it's a geographic situation. So we have wind and protection from one side, and even on the other bay we have protection from the other side. So this is very privileged situation if we compare with Flores, with Corvo, with Pico, with São Jorge, that even nowadays have problems in the winter time, and all of this bad weather is affecting the coast. Here we have like a safe haven where these boats can stay. And also the big boats, they didn't come to the land Actually, they just stay there, as we see in, now in April and May and June. All the boats popping up in the Bay Area, they would stay there, and then everything would be transported in smaller ships in. And Tiago can tell some more about this, because also the cargo some cargo needs to be always unloaded, correct? And also the longer the boats stay here, the
Counterfeit.
Contraband. So the boats couldn't stay long, and there is a lot of traffic around, and it's a lot of things going out of the boats quickly. And then Tiago can also talk about that, because pirates and corsarios, privateers, are very present here. But yes, the boats can only stay some time in Horta. They need to go out, because yes, if a boat is taken by pirates or something is stolen, it's a rare event. If they stay here very long, it's happening every day that something is going out of the boat. So the boats can only stay here for a while, and then they need to go out. And then later on, after with coal and with steam ships, you totally change the era. So it's not working around. The ships don't need to do these roads this way. They can just kind of ship straight, and then they need to build this harbor for different reasons. Tiago will tell this much better than I.
I think you said everything. but basically, is that when I talk, I could be days here talking about all of this, so I try to be very short. And about these things, when in 1519, I said Angra, so everything was from India was passing in Angra, and the king created what was called the Armada das Índias, so the Armada das Ilhas. So the fleet of the islands or something like that. That was a group of ships that would come from Lisbon, and when the ships from India was coming, because south to the south of Azores was safe, to the north of Azores there was ships, the privateers and pirates, and so these ships this armada would come from Lisbon to Flores, to around Flores, and then you would catch the Portuguese armada coming from India, the Carreira da Índia, and then would escort them to Angra, and then from Angra to Lisbon. And so they would be safe from all these ships that were literally, they could see them. They were like there waving, saying, "Hello, we are going to attack you." So they would need to be very. It was all this process, but the order was when you arrived to Angra, even unless the ship is like with water all over and there's nothing you could do, like happened here in 1650. Nossa Senhora da Luz, shipwrecked here, was one of these ships from India, and shipwrecked here in Portopim, was one of the biggest shipwrecks in history of Portugal, and from Carreira da Índia was probably the biggest, and I think it was the biggest operation of saving the cargo of that ship. The order was you have 3 days to stop in Angra and to do all, you needed some repairing, refuel. Yes, refuel. There's another term for the ships, but to have the food and the water and everything they needed, take care of the hill. There was always people that arrived here. And they had these 3 days, and after 3 days, so take care of everything, and then even if it's a big storm, and even if it's one of the biggest problems actually was the very, very, very good weather, because if there was no wind, they couldn't sail. That was a problem sometimes. But even if there is a storm, or if they have the pirates there waving them outside waiting for them, you go and you sail. You have the escort of the navy and you go. Because if a ship was lost for a pirate or for shipwreck or anything, A ship from India would be something today like the cargo there, and they were always overloaded. It would be something of the hundreds or 1,000 or more of millions of euros today. So it would be something absolutely, we can't imagine if a ship was lost, it was a national problem. But the probability of that happen was very, very low. In hundreds of ships that came from around these 2 or 3 centuries, there was, I don't know the numbers, but the percentage is very, like 0.0 something percent. But instead, when a ship was in the harbor, there was 100% probability that there was contraband happening all the time. So the more time it stopped there, the more things were going out. And they had things coming in pockets, there were things, boxes thrown outside into around Monte Queimado, and people going at night there picking them, and all the things you can imagine. And so they had to go away. We have a notice for mid 18th century, 1750 or 57, I think, I'm not sure, an order by the king saying, now the ships stop going to Faial and start going to Angra again, because in Faial they are stealing diamonds and gold and spices and everything. And so there's so much contraband that we are losing a lot of money in Faial, so go to Angra. And what happened was the city hall, the Câmara, Casa da Câmara at the time, they met with all these rich guys that had the merchants here. The local elite, they all met together, and the responsibles from the convents and the main institutions, they did this, what would be now we have a Conselho de Ilha, the island council was something like that. They met in emergency situations, and they said, okay, we need to do something. Everybody, your wallets, we need money to pay a travel to a guy to go to Lisbon, talk directly to the king, say, please don't, because if they go to Angra, it's the end of Faial. So we don't know exactly what happened. They sent the guy to Lisbon, and again, we don't have the rest of the information, but nothing happened apparently. They still came here. They kept coming to Faial. But so this was a constant situation. So the harbor we have now there, it started in 1876, and so, but until even the Darnay era and the coal era on the 19th century, most of that, most of those things happened before we have this physical harbor. What I did here 2 days ago was basically, I started saying, oh, what is the port of Horta? And people say, oh, it's the harbor there, where the dock where the ships docked and people go out and in, and the cargo and everything. And I said, okay, but until a little bit more than 100 years ago, they didn't exist. When the Dagny were trading here and this was happening and everything, there was no harbor. Now there is harbor. So the harbor is, and I didn't have time to talk about this today, but the idea is that especially that south area, Porto Pinho and Santa Cruz, so that's why the main fortress is there in Santa Cruz, and all this south area around where we are here, from here to Relógio, to Torre do Relógio, where is the main church, and Ribeira da Conceição, that was the historical center, now it's a historical center, that was the center of where there was the Câmara, the sort of religious institutions, Misericordia, the hospital, the main convents, so all the institutions, even the costumes was there, and the city. But that, if you go to any other village around Portugal, even in the interior, they would have this thing, the main church, the Casa da Câmara, the jail, so these institutions, even a hospital or a small place like that. And then you have the south part when there was the institutions related to the harbor, so the different part that existed here in Angra and Lisbon, places like this, and all that area, but of course spreading until Conceição, all the Horta developed around the harbor. And so we have, since the people that were, I'm looking at the computer, there's the next slide, I only present the one I had prepared. I had like a backup of some other things that we could talk more. The next one would be talking about this relation I referred about to sea. We lived to the inside. In Horta, there was, in Angra, In Horta there was this specific culture that is, and if you want to talk about the sea city, and we are the island with the history related to the sea, and the identity that is related to the sea, we can say that. Not just sea, just because like we now do what others do, but in the 18th century, 19th century, when all the others lived to the land, the water or the sea was a place of unknown, the fear and the danger, everything, and they would go there to fish, they would go of course to circulate, but it was as minimum as it was needed. In Horta there was people who were, and remember the whale huntings, there was not professional whale hunters. There were professionals of doing that, but they all did other things. That was a complement of what they did. Fishermen and people here around the islands, even if with some sea communities, they would work the land and then one day they would go out in the sea. And in Horta, we had people that was all year long working specifically to the sea, repairing ships, fueling ships, doing sails, the calafacho, I don't know how we'd say that, as we did like protect the sea, the wood for the water don't come in, so do the protection, so all those things. And then we had, of course, merchants. We had people who were doing selling, like we have today to the yachts. People we have these like small stores or storages to sell to the ships. And then we had things like prostitutes. We had things like translators. We had an official translator, at least since the beginning of the 19th century. That is a profession that didn't exist almost anywhere else. There was the consuls, and it was the let's see if I can say this in English, general translator for the foreign nations or the foreign languages, depending on who writes the document. Once even professions in one document is with one name, the other one they say in another way, but you see it's the official translator of the seat of the village at the time. Just one small thing. Pedro was saying that I end in the 18th century. This was on purpose, so I'm studying this, so I'm suspect about these things, and you say I like this area, but also these are the things, some of the things here are not even published yet or are not very known yet. I'm still working on it. I try to bring different things. If you are interested about Faial history, probably you will learn about the kind of submarine cables and aviation, all those things, so I didn't talk about this. And we would like for you to say, so if there are things about this, or in the more recent, or whatever, so if there are things that you would like to do specific conferences or specific visits or other activities, of course you can then write to Pedro, to the association, and think about it and then make proposals. So the idea here is we are also already arguing these specific things. And it's good, but the idea is that we can you can propose things, and so even if it's tomorrow or other people that are not here today, so we are open to do these things.
Well, I was just on the translators. One of the things I thought was very interesting is Tiago has here the list of consuls, so representatives from different countries. They have more of economical aspect than a political aspect. They are not only representatives of this country. They are people who are helping people from their country, or who they can communicate to, make the connection when they arrive here. So they can help translating. They can help solve problems. So the consul, they are not a diplomatic thing so much. They are more a commercial. They have this commercial aspect, and then it's when the big ship arrives. Tiago was saying, even if they are almost dying and they really need to get to the shore and they need some water and food, always health inspection. So this place as a trading point is receiving ships from many places, and the health inspection is an important step. So always before something comes out of the ship, there is a group the health inspector and most likely a translator or the consul representative who is going there to meet, and they want to know where they are coming from, if they are coming from a blacklisted country, something like this, where there is some kind of disease, and all of this is first things first, is health. And it's amazing to see like how hundreds of years ago they have these kind of measures in a port, in a like a closing point, and so even before, yes, water and wine and all of this, health inspection and translator. So translator to make a connection.
Couldn't speak to anyone. They couldn't contact to anyone. Not even a translator. They couldn't contact to anyone. Just a pilot. There was a pilot going to the main ship, and then they couldn't contact to anyone else before the health inspector go there. So the same thing they did with COVID now, last year or 2 years ago. So it happened, and there was this lists of countries where there was the plague or diseases or specific ship. There was, like happened now with COVID, we have letters about this ship that was sailing from this route. They had a contagious disease in the ship, so if anyone in a port or in sea they had contact with this ship or people from this ship, you cannot, so the contact is minimal possible. So this is what is very interesting. I didn't talk about today.
Yes, but also about the transformation of the landscape and what we see as today as an island. I think it's a very interesting aspect to also to understand why some of these things are not so visible nowadays. Is also Faial Island is an island that has been suffering from seisms for a long time and very intense and with very intense destruction. So, for instance, 1926, there is a big earthquake, and a lot of these buildings and structures that would be part of these periods, they disappear, and so there is a lot of reconstruction. And also one of the things that Tiago mentioned in the courses is that there is some type of cities that they have a period where they are amazingly important and they become what they are, and then they have a decline period. And in a way they freeze in that moment. So you have these historical cities that are kind of everything you see is from the same period. In Horta it kept changing with time, so different economical cycles also make that a building has now a function, then is changed to suit a different function. And for instance, from the period of the wine trade, some houses, they are the same houses, but they were changed, so we don't have the same historical buildings with the same function, because it changed, it was transformed a lot through time. But it's also very interesting to know that in Horta there were many convents. In some areas that we nowadays see like a praça, there was a building, and there was actually relevant building. For instance, in Praça da República, we have some images of Convento da Glória. Convento da Glória. So actually there is a very interesting image Tiago showed, where we see a 3-story building in what we see now a playground with trees, and so these were in different areas of the city. Actually, some of them they were burned in fires, or they were damaged, or they were just demolished because they were too big and they were not how do you say, they were not in use anymore, so they were replaced and they were demolished. Also in Florencio Terra there was also Convento de São João also. So now we have a garden over there, but it used to be a convent. And also some other churches also disappear. So, and even more amazingly, we can see in some not pictures but drawings that from Conceição Beach up until I don't know to Porto Pim, all of this area was walled. So it has a wall, a defensive wall, and you have entrances like in Porto Pim, where we'll do the beginning of our city tour tomorrow and on Saturday. These gates were the entrances from the sea inside. Not like nowadays we have an avenue with the view to Pico, and so 100 years ago it's a beach, and then there is a wall separating and protecting us from the sea. So these are big transformations. Now they are making this construct in Avenida, so they are renewing what they call Frente Mar, so 20th century, 21st century concept. And where there was a public bathroom over there, there was a little piece of the old wall, actually. And there is, when you go to the town hall, a bit more to the left, you have this area where you come from the avenue, and then you go down a little bit to go to the area where there is Correios. And this, when you turn, and there is a little level, there is actually a part of this is the old wall. You have some panels there, some tiles on the top, but you can see some openings. And these stones were this wall that was actually coming all the way from one side of town up until to the other side. And when you go to Porto Pim and you go to Monte da Guia, you have some wall over there, and this was all covered with this. So what we now have as openness to the sea and the connection with the sea, and all of this was a very, very different landscape 100 years ago. So 150 years ago maybe we have a port that we see, that we now understand as the port, but it was already a port before, a harbor before. Then we have Marina, which was built around when I was born. So before that it was sea up until Largo do Infante, so it was sea breaking there. And even the new port that is now maybe 15 years on the other edge, so it's a transformation. So in just 150 years it's a lot of transformation, and what we now perceive as being the port, or our relation with the sea, is actually very, very different and had very different periods.
Just say three quick things what Petro just said. One about this, I was telling, if I forgot, about the wall. So this is important to have this image. Even if you go to Avenida, most of the houses, actually all the mid of the city, what we see in Avenida is the back of the houses, because the city is all inside, is for the land, not for the sea. Now we have this idea of building the Frente Mar and everything to the sea, but the city is, as the urbanism of the city is all built to the inside and with the backs to the sea. And there was the wall all across as you see now in Porto Pim, there is the small wall, the fortress, and you have Portal to Porto Pim with the sea gate. You have these gates here on the city, so this on the village, and you see this thing about, we can say, okay, it was all sand, they could just land somewhere and go in. They couldn't, because there was an health inspector and other procedures. I don't have time now. There was all different procedures, and this is easily explained because it was closed. So even if they go out the boat, they just go to the wall and to the door, and there was a guard there, and they couldn't go into the village. About
No, it's just because even even when we now see the new harbor and there is the, where there is the courthouse, there used to be a big fortress over there as well. And up until the beginning of the 20th century, it was there. And they think maybe it eroded. It was built partially on sand, and probably it eroded because they built the other harbor, and that changed the currents, and that eroded the base of the fortress. And because it was not necessary, it was not in use anymore. It was just an old fortress. It just washed away. And but these fortresses were happening all over the coast.
About what was Pedro saying of buildings changing across time, just to give one example that you can, I think it's a strong example, maybe a little bit extreme, but this is the history of Faial. The last big earthquake, maybe some of you were here, was 24 years ago, so in 1998, and destructed a big part of the island. And where is now Torre do Relógio, that was the main church there, Matriz, and it was built in the late 15th or early 16th century. In the late 16th century, it was burned by Sir Walter Raleigh, one of these attacks that I talked about. They burned down the church. Then they rebuilt it, probably using the walls and a part of it, but they rebuilt it. And then along the 17th and 18th century, it was struck by a lightning. It had a fire, they struck part of it. Then there was, of course, earthquakes in the middle, and that was at least some other privateer attacks and an hurricane that took part of the roof. And by the end of and then they built the tower in the 18th century, but by the end of the 18th century they said it was running inside and it was all completely, so, and they needed a new one. As they had the Jesuit church was empty, they used it first time as it was supposed to be just for some time, and then the other basically started collapsing and they demolished it. But this is a common thing about our heritage. And about what he's saying, the use of the Horta having different uses across time, there is this a theory, not as hypothesis, but as a theoretical study about ports. So things that are equal for all the port cities around in villages around the world. And this theory says that a port, as Pedro was saying, there is historical moments, and so there is a moment where this city is important because the routes of at that time passed there, and that then it changed 50 years later, 100 years later, so the route ended and that port is not important anymore. It happens in ports, in border cities, in some other contexts, so, but basically across history, so there is, with few exceptions, like some capitals, some big large cities, but in ports usually there is this. And if we think in Angra, I talk about Angra, if you go there, it's like Angra, they believe this, but what they have, the stories they tell about Angra is 16th and 17th centuries, the Carreira da Índia that was passing there, because after that the port of Angra disappeared. Today it doesn't exist literally. There is a marina that is recent, but the ships go to Praia, so there is no harbor there. But they have the Casa da Alfândega that we don't have here anymore. The historical one they have there, they are old, they have the old hospital, the military, the fortress, they have all the equipment, but that is all from the old Angra. In Horta, starting in the 17th century until today, of course we don't have the route from Brazil, we don't have the coal, we don't have the airplanes, we don't have nothing of that, but as it happened with the economy, the exportations, there was these cycles of things that when there was the decline of the route from Brazil, then there was the coal, then there was the planes, then there was the submarine cables, now we have the yachts, and the Horta as the port as a general concept, so the different, because it's different kinds of port, but as the port of Horta was always very important across this time, and this is, I can say it's unique, but it's not common, it's against what is supposed to be, so this is a very interesting thing. And this rule applies to Angra, to Ponta Delgada, to all the other ports, and in Horta it doesn't apply, it goes against the rule. And just, I think we need to finish. I don't know if someone wants to say something, but I had, so as I said first, so we are open to ideas. And talking about this, Pedro is very enthusiastic about these things that I didn't talk about, all the process. So on the other conference, I spoke specifically about this, when they arrive, how the ship stops and everything, the consoles. We have some interesting registered letters and testimonies about this that I didn't bring today, because even just one would take a little bit to read, and then I will talk a lot about it, as you probably are seeing. I talk a lot and start getting enthusiastic. And one of the activity that I think it would be interesting, some of these things are in English. I have some inedited ones, or that are published in the 18th century in England, so that I'm translating and studying. And I think one thing interesting, this is not, I'm not booking anything, just an idea. If you agree, if people say, oh, this would be nice, we can do that sometime, do something like this about the port, and do, instead of a conference, do a kind of a lecture. I bring some of these texts. Some of you probably speak English better than me. I have this one that is by a woman, would be interesting, being read by a woman, and do kind of a lecture of texts with some of these images. I have some inedited ones too, and this, I think this could be an interesting thing. And I have many material in English, so we can do it with original documents. It's just an idea, just have in the middle of this. But if you'd like, so if someone wants to say something else.
I'd like to just say something very quickly, and you can answer with yes or no.
Okay. Message understood.
Do you know anything about the tunnels of Faial?
Of Horta, convent, and yes and no.
Oh!
We can talk later. I'm just going to say one thing about. I know the stories of the tunnels. I think I haven't been in those, but kind of in one. What I can say is that those kind of stories exist in all the places, all the cities, all the convents. And in some places that exist, in some places don't exist. In all the places, it's never what the myth says. We have some under things in some churches and other places, but the tunnels and all the myth, it's not. So most of it's burial places. We have some of those things. If you go to Carmo, you see one that is open now, and that is actually an entrance of a tunnel. And there was a tunnel there that we don't know. Probably was some other, a bigger burial chamber or something. So, but those think about nuns meeting priests, and I probably heard that. No, but I can tell you this: there are much more interesting stories about nuns jumping out the windows, going away with sailors, dating with guys on the windows, guys going in and stealing fruits to the nuns, sailors, nuns start trying to touch the bodies of the sailors through those windows and everything. I think that is true. I can bring a testimony or something like that for us to read, and I think that's much more interesting than inventing things that apparently are interesting. If we start telling all these stories, they are much more interesting. So.
Yes. So tomorrow we had a program at 2:00, city tour, starting in Portopim, at near Padre Popular, at the gate of Portopim, and weather doesn't look so good. And for Saturday the same. We will be posting on our Facebook event. We'll be posting. If the city tour doesn't happen there or doesn't start there, we'll do a tour on Horta Museum at the same time, and we will post this just briefly before, maybe 30 minutes before or something like this. If the weather is good, we'll meet in Portopim. If the weather is not good, we'll meet in Horta Museum. and we'll do a more indoors tour. It was supposed to go from there to Horta Museum. We can start in Horta Museum and then we'll see. Yes, both days are the same tour, so it's not two different things. You can come the day that works the best for you.
Double.
And thank you for everybody for coming. And thank you to Rita for challenging the associação, and Inovan for spreading the word, and for Biblioteca to welcome us here.